Okay, so let's get started. Yeah, I think this works fine if we are more people, and because we are not, maybe I just ask you, like, what is your current role? And we do it like that. So, what is your role? I maybe do this one.
Test manager.
Test manager, okay, yeah.
Development and part-time Scrum Master.
Okay, yeah, good.
And I also do some of the product owners' job.
Right, sorry, yes. So the question was, so I had this one up at first, so what is your current role? And I said, because we are not that many people, maybe we just go around and...
I'm a C++ programmer.
Okay, very good. So, yeah.
C++.
Yeah. All
Yes,
right.
I must say other.
You do everything, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I just switched jobs, so we haven't really defined
Yeah.
it yet.
So you don't know yet what your role is?
I haven't shaped it.
Very good, okay. Okay, yeah.
Platform architect.
Yeah, you said it already? No.
I'm a developer. I'm considering development management.
Okay. And yes. You. Oh.
Yeah, I'm starting.
Okay. And you? What is your role? No, the one. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Also a developer. Okay. Good. So what we are talking about today is actually, I guess you know that, not about development. I assume you have seen that and read this. So it's on maybe more on the company side and what kind of changes are happening there. A little bit from myself. Oh, I'm kind of really praying right for every slide because it screwed up so much just before. Okay, so I started actually as a developer, and I encountered, I think it was in '98, extreme programming, and so I used it as a developer in an extreme programming environment, and then moved on to more like helping teams how they can benefit from Agile. And just because the environment was the way it was, I started using it in a scaled environment, and I have the books here. Of course, it's great marketing, but it's also, they show kind of my history, where I'm coming from. So I first used it in a scaled environment. So this was my first book, Agile Software Development in the Large. And then those scaled ones were not co-located anymore. So I went to the distributed setting. And then it was more looking at, well, there's the environment around the teams, and this environment often hinders the teams to really benefit from Agile. And then I looked into more maybe cost of delay and organizational change and what we can do here. And this is kind of the journey, and which goes on with what I want to present here today, which is also my latest book, which looks more into how can the whole company be Agile. So what would make a company Agile? And so, yeah, you see, we try to put on all buzzwords we could possibly find at the moment on the title. However, of course, they also mean something. There's a reason why they're there. I would like to, again, we don't need to use the Menti unless you want to. That maybe is fun as well. Yet I would like to ask you, what do you see as the biggest challenges right now companies are facing?
Well, I think for tech companies, at least in Norway, one of the biggest is attracting and growing talent.
That's a big one, yes. I guess that's almost everywhere, yeah. What else?
Everyone is moving into becoming software companies.
Ah, that, yeah.
To solving their complexity with software.
Yeah.
But few companies are rigged for doing software development.
That's true. So this is, are you also using, I'm asking it in a cautious way because I ran into a different country where they are not calling it this way. So we call it digitalization. Is this what you're using as well? Yeah. And so I have an example there, a company of a client of mine, I think it was at least 5 years ago, where, so client, it was BMW, which is kind of known, so I'm from Germany. And their manager told me, well, you know, we are actually a software company now. We are not a car manufacturer anymore. Because the key differentiator between one car and the other is now software, and it's also the thing they are struggling most with. However, probably still now, if you talk to somebody else, that other whatever manager will probably say, no, that's not true. We are a car manufacturer still, right? So it's not, which is also kind of what you are saying. It's not understood everywhere that this is a big challenge companies are facing. So sometimes I also refer to this, that companies are software companies, although they don't know it yet, maybe, right? Okay, what else do you see? Or do you see?
I think an extension to that is places that understand they need to do digital transformation, like the automotive industry is one, but like I don't know how many banks tell me we're not a bank, we're a software company with a
Yes.
license.
Yes.
You know, every industry says this.
Yes.
Yeah, but they haven't changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Which is, yeah.
They say the words, but nothing has changed
Yeah.
about the organization.
Very true. And it's hard. Yeah. Anything else where you think, well, this is a key challenge you see maybe in your company or with your clients, or that?
Renewal. Our company is quite large, so you know we're set in our ways and adapting to new markets and new ways of doing things are
Right.
equally harder than so.
Yeah, yeah. And probably also the need for renewing is related to, for example, digitalization, but also probably for general demands. So maybe like 1-2 other things that I see is that the market demand has changed as well, that the clients, customers are not willing to wait that long anymore, and it's really independent from the industry you are in. Again, if I use like car manufacturing, there it was for a long time obvious that, well, you can take at least 5 years to engineer a new car, a new model, right? But that's not possible anymore. And then with that, very often clients also expect more and more that the products you are delivering, that they can be very much customized. So there's hardly like one like the other, and that clients want to have an influence, an impact on the product. So the market has changed as well. So being quicker out there and also, well, being more responsible to change. And all of that together, actually, well, of course, that's also where I'm coming from. I'm biased here. But all of that together, I think, really ask companies to be agile, really. And agile now in the literal sense. So not like every company needs to be a Scrum company, but more like agile in the sense of being flexible, responsive, adaptive, maybe nimble. So these are things that are expected from companies. And then we have the question like what you're saying, so how can a company renew itself, or maybe also what does this really mean? And so the way I see it is actually, although companies should be agile or more agile than there are for addressing these challenges, they still, well, agile is not the answer to it. That's probably the key point. So the agile as we know it, like Scrum, Kanban, anything like that, or even Lean, it just provides one answer, but not everything can be answered like that. So what's needed to be done, if we think of agile companies, we have to look beyond agile, and this is where this comes in. This looks weird. Was this here before on the other slide? I don't know. Okay, no, okay. Anyway, so this is where we were coming from when we were looking at okay, what is really needed for a company to be really agile in the real sense? And we looked what's out there. And the stuff that's out there is really there for a long time. And all of these, well, what you see here, different streams. Now it disappeared. That's really interesting. All of these all of these 4 different streams are around for a long time, and they have an answer for companies being agile from their perspective. And I think they're all very, very true or right from their perspective. For example, if I talk to people from Beyond Budgeting, they tell me there's no way of becoming agile as a company as long as you fix your budgets annually, because you cannot act to quick different market demands because the money is already gone in the different budgets. And I think we all have seen that well, in both ways. For example, that a project doesn't need that much money as you thought at first that it needs. Well, nobody is returning the money back, but everyone is keeping spending it, which is good for example for conferences. Maybe it's also good for people like me, coach consultants, independent people, right? So this is where then some money is left over, that's great. However, it's also the other way around. If more money is needed, it's not really there, and they cannot really act that flexibly. And I think it's right. So as long as we deal with the budgets the way we are dealing with them, it's just not possible for companies to be really agile overall. Then if we look at open space, though, there the people say more like, well, that goes into the first thing, the talent part. If you are not managing to leverage the passion of the people, they might not even work for you, or they will disappear very quickly. So they will find something else where they really want to work on. And so you have to have a more inviting culture here. And again, that's very true, I think. Otherwise, it will be hard to address these challenges we've been talked about earlier. Then if I look at Sociocracy, there the people say as long as the decisions are made centrally and the power is not really decentralized, so the power structure is like going to the top, and so this is kind of how things are decided as well. You are just too slow in making decisions as well for those challenges. And again, I think that's true. And then there's Agile. I think I don't need to say a lot about that because I just assume you all have heard enough of it. So, so the thing is, these different streams, they all provide a perspective on what an agile company could look like and what it needs to have or imply and show for being really agile, but all from a different perspective. And so we brought these things together in what we call, well, because it was possible to speak as well, the bossa nova. Actually, there's also a bit of a other reason than it was pronounceable, and it's a nice acronym. Bossa nova is a style of music, and there it's a fusion of samba and new cool jazz, not new, samba and cool jazz, and so this is also a fusion. And then the other thing is it's in Portuguese, it means new trend, new wave, and of course we think this is what it is. Okay, so I would like to dive into those 4 streams a little bit deeper so you get a better idea. However, it's just a nutshell thing, right? We start with Beyond Budgeting. One problem Beyond Budgeting has is the name. It's kind of what we see in Agile as well. So for example, the extreme programming, where people thought it sounds too extreme and too much like programming, and therefore it's not the right thing also. And Beyond Budgeting sounds like it's about budgeting only, and it's not. It's actually more about management style and getting over command and control and more in the direction of being adaptive and empower people. So this is actually where they're really heading for. However, it started in the budgeting area, and this is also why they chose that term at the beginning. And it's also the belief that the way you deal with your budget defines very much the way you're managing the company. Because we always try to adhere to whatever we committed in the budget. And so it's kind of, on the one hand, I think it's a good name, but the beyond budgeting people, they actually feel like, well, it sounds too much budget and it should be more like beyond maybe command and control or something like that. Anyway, so I want to pick out one aspect of beyond budgeting, and there are really many more. However, this is something where I think it shows very clearly what it really means. And first of all, the thing is that budgets really fulfill three kinds of purposes. Well, any idea what they could be? Why do we do that, after all? Why do we come up with budgets?
Manage cash flow.
Manage cash flow is one thing.
Manage expectation.
Manage expectations, yeah, which goes in the direction of how to control what's happening. So the way they are looking at it is that there are these three purposes. One is targets, which is what do we want to achieve? So what kind of product do we want to build? Which market do we want to win over and stuff like that? So what is the target? So where are we going? The second is forecast. What do we think will happen? And then kind of derived from that, it is resource allocation. So based on those two, where do we actually spend the money on? So it's actually these three questions. Where do we want to head? What do we think is happening in that area? And maybe also in others, which will influence that. And then what are we willing to invest here? And that's the resource allocation. The thing is, most often we try, no, that's really a typical, it's not only a most often, what we try is with a budget, we combine all these three different purposes into one number, which most often then means that, especially for those two, either the target is not really ambitious anymore, or the forecast is completely wrong. And I think we all have seen that. Like, it can be in a different way as well in a project. If we get the question, oh, how long will it take to get this thing done? And then you give an answer. And then, well, let's see it. Now you tell me, well, it takes half a year or something. And I'm your manager, and I'm saying, well, that can't be true. Have you heard something like that? And so more or less, I'm asking you, please give me a different number. And I know already a number that you have to give me, and otherwise I will not really leaving here. And so we have this kind of negotiation till you say a number you are not happy with. I'm happy with, however, maybe I know that it's not true. Maybe I believe it's true, I don't know. But yet, this is really the thing, what's happening. So then, and sometimes neither of those is good anymore. So we head for something and we assume this and this is happening. However, you know already that won't happen, right? And so beyond budgeting says, first of all, be aware that these are these three different purposes, and therefore you can also deal with them in a different way. And the different way would be for targets that you come up with relative targets, which is now, it doesn't really fit so well with my example from how long does it take for that feature. However, you could also say, maybe we have a feature that is related to whatever competitor is doing, and it does it like that or differently or something, so comparable to something else. So having it relative. Then for a forecast, not fixing it up front, but having it rolling or adaptive. So you're not fixing it up front and say, okay, it will take us, or we need to have this by then and then, but you look at this ever once and again, and then you adapt to it. And then this means the adaptation is then the dynamic resource allocation. Given on the new things we have learned, the new circumstances, we decide now where the money is going to, and not like a year in advance. I want to give you an example which is maybe not really your world, but I still think it shows the thing very well. So a friend of mine, she's a salesperson. And as sales often works, she has her yearly objectives. So not in this way, right? Like the traditional thing. Her yearly objectives saying, well, Susan, you have to sell 100 units of our product over the year. Now, you know what's happening. If she sells, have made her number by October, maybe November, she stops selling anymore. She moves it to the next year because, on the one hand, if she keeps selling, she knows her objectives will be way up for the next year. And on the other hand, she doesn't know what next year will happen, and therefore she better shifts that to the next year so she's a bit safer for the next year, right? And also vice versa, if Susan, and that's actually her real name, if Susan realizes in October there's no way that I make my numbers, also she shifts everything to the next year because, well, she won't get the bonus anyway, right? So this is the one thing. The other thing is, now let's assume she made her bonus, everything is fine, so she sold the 100 units. Now what if her competitor has sold 200? The 100 is really meaningless. What if her competitor has sold 20? Wow. So this is what's meant with like relative, right? The absolute numbers, especially nowadays in, well, we haven't used that term before when we looked at challenges in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. The absolute targets, they are not useful anymore because the world is changing too fast. And so what's needed is something where even the targets are adapting and or are fluid maybe. So this is kind of the glimpse into beyond budgeting. Now, looking at open space, let me first ask you, who knows open space from like conferences, unconferences, facilitation formats, anything you have heard of it or have been at one or so? Okay, so open space, let me try this here. Open space is used a lot as a facilitation technique and in something what's called an unconference. And the story is this, that after a conference like this, the inventor of open space, Harrison Owen, asked people what did they like most, and now probably you have to close your ears over them. And people repeatedly said the breaks. And he was really kind of, well, this is annoying. I put so much effort into putting this program together and people say they like the breaks most. Well, there's a reason for that. And probably the program also inspires that. But still, it is in the breaks where we can network, where we can dive into the topics more deeper that really interest us, get together with the people we kind of think, well, I'm really interested to hear what you think about X, Y, Z or so. And so he used all what's happening in the breaks and made a conference format out of it, which is now called unconference, which means people are getting together and at the moment they are there, they suggest whatever ideas on their mind and say, well, I really would like to talk about X, Y, Z. And so they put it up like in a program agenda. And then people who are interested to talk about that topic, like at a coffee break, they go there and talk about it. Which also means, well, if they're kind of fed up and think, well, I've heard everything I need to hear and I contributed everything I can contribute to this topic, they move on to a different topic, like what you do in a coffee break, where you maybe say to the people you're hanging around with, oh, I need to grab another coffee, and you walk over and you talk to other people, right? So there isn't like a clear boundary around that. And it's also that we are not looking at, is everyone here? Can we start now? Well, we start whenever we start, when we feel like, okay, it's the time for that topic. So this is kind of what open space does as a conference format. Now, what I'm looking at, so for an organization, is that open space can be used for organizations as a strategy, really. And for example, W.L. Gore, so from Gore-Tex, the inventors of Gore-Tex, right? They run their companies like this. And it means that everyone is invited at any time to suggest a new product, a new feature. And if there are enough people who say, like, that's a cool idea, let's get going and let's do it, it's a go. So it's not waiting for an innovation lab or a think tank or design thinking session or what else is around there. It's just kind of an open invitation at all times, and people self-organize around that topic. So it's really from a strategy here, and you might remember that at first I said open space works more with the passion of the people. It's, if I'm passionate about that topic, I will work on that, right? And therefore, maybe I'm more interested in staying here at this company. And there are actually some ways how you can get there. Oh, right, and I think I have an example later on. Okay, then we have sociocracy, and now let me ask you first, who has heard of that weird term? Cool, cool, 2 people, very good. So sociocracy is kind of like democracy for organizations. And it is where, well, now my Greek, which isn't existent. So democracy is like ruled by the demos, by the mass, whereas sociocracy is ruled by the socios, which are people who have a relation to each other. So this is kind of where it comes from. And it's based on equivalence. And also here I want to provide a few examples. So one is how decisions are made. And decisions are here made by consent. And consent might sound very much like consensus. Well, it's not. It is different. It is consent. Let me maybe start first. Oh, no, let's look at the watch. Yeah, consent asks for, can you accept or live with that decision, versus consensus asks, do you agree with that decision? And the difference might sound marginal, but it's really huge. So if I'm in consensus round, I might not like it. I just have a different preference or whatever, and therefore I don't give my consensus to it. However, for consent, it's more like, can I tolerate it? Can I live with that? And this makes a huge, huge difference. Very often what we do with this is also asking, well, maybe can you live with that decision for the next 3 months, and then we revisit it? Also, this is sometimes helpful for people to go with a specific decision. And there are a few things that come with it. For example, one thing that we keep saying is that decision good enough for now, safe enough to try? And if it's not, maybe we shouldn't consent to it. Now, if I don't give my consent, if I say I can't tolerate it, then I have to say how I think that this decision will risk our joint goal. And only then it is really an objection, and then it's also an objection we really want to know about, because it means we are following a path that might not be helpful for us. So there's no way for me saying, well, I don't like it, I think it's stupid, right? I need to say how I think this decision puts our joint goal at risk. And which also changes then the whole attitude, different again than consensus, where we try, if I'm the one with this objection, then probably all of you try to convince me that I'm wrong with my objection. That's a typical consensus thing. However, in consent, the attitude is in this way different, that you all say, oh, probably we have overlooked something. We should really look into this and solve that issue because it puts our joint goal at risk, and we don't want that. We want to reach our goal, right? We want to be able to do that. So this is consent, which isn't maybe as fast as an autocratic decision where we just say, well, this is this way we are going. However, implementing autocratic decisions are often hard too, because then people, if they don't buy into it, they find their way around. And then democratic decisions, they might be quicker too. However, there you have the minority which is ignored. And, well, what we have seen in the States, that sometimes it's even the majority that's ignored. Oh, maybe we see that in Britain as well right now. I don't know. Okay, so this is consent. Now, the other thing for equivalence here is looking at the power structure, which is typically implemented by a hierarchy, so a top-down thing. Now, looking at this from a again, Agile perspective, Agile company perspective, what's really missing, well, of course, I also have been trying it like that, is there's no feedback going up. It always goes top down. And so this is what Sociocracy brings in, which is called double linking. So you have from every level in the hierarchy, on the one hand, you have like an appointed manager, but you also have, this would be that guy, a representative who is elected one level higher up in the hierarchy. And because those people are making their decisions based on consent, everyone has the same vote. It's not that the appointed manager has a different vote than the representative has. So that's another concept from Sociocracy. But I think what's really very strong here is that it starts where companies are. So it doesn't say hierarchies are stupid, throw out all your managers, which is a tough message, right? And here it's also clear, well, we need them, it's important, and they had a role, and they still have their responsibilities, yet we feel that we need to embed the feedback here in the structure. And that's what double linking does. Okay, now the next thing, Agile, and yeah, I just think you know enough about that, but the core is that cycle where we keep getting the feedback in. That's why I said in the structure I'm missing as an Agile person the feedback embedded, and it's more about like continuously learning by getting that feedback. Now I want to give you a few examples how that can look like and how it looks like in companies. So this is one example from a client of mine. And there the thing was, it's an ERP producer, not the big German one, a smaller Swiss one. And there the decision was to come up with feature teams and look at the whole ERP system, what kind of different products are there. And now the question was, what do we do with these, I think like 120 people, who should work on what? So kind of an Agile transformation also, if you think. And what we did there was a thing that's now, I think, well known as self-selecting teams. So we came up with, well, we need a team which focuses on purchase, for example. And then we said, for some of them, we said kind of what we know what's coming up. Sometimes we also knew what kind of skills, responsibilities were there. Sometimes that was a given anyway, and sometimes it wasn't clear. So that was sometimes filled in and sometimes not. And then people started to put up their names on a sticky here and say, well, I would be interested to work on that. And we had this, so this is really from that company. So we had those flip charts hanging in the atrium for, I think, like 2 weeks. And people sorted themselves out until at the end we had like a team like this. So where you have everyone who's like want to work on that, and this was the product owner who signed up for that as well. And there were a few interesting things, and if you haven't realized that, this goes absolutely in the direction of what I try to explain with open space. It's not as a strategy. It's not that huge thing that W.L. Gore does, like everyone can suggest a product feature, but everyone can decide what she wants to work on, right? So this is what this does. And so at first we thought, well, we know some areas, they're really boring. And probably nobody will sign up for them. So it was also my big fear at that time. However, magically, it really was sorted out. And also, another fear I had was, well, probably there will be this one team which will be very strong, and then we have a few laggard teams. Also, this didn't happen. People talked to each other and said, like, oh, we really would need you over there. Can you consider to go there? Or they realized it themselves, like, well, we really have a lot of skills around that and that here. Maybe I should move over there. So it's just they sorted it out, which gave a completely different way of passion around the thing they worked on. So that's again, it's a real example here. And actually, yeah, I repeated that also in different settings later and in different occasions. And for example, when we were distributed, we just had this kind of flip chart, but not as a flip chart on a wiki, on like Confluence, and people signed up and moved their names around and talked to each other and had comments. So that's also possible. Okay, that's one example. Another example is this one. I guess you all have seen that. Maybe you see it after you return from NDC TechTown as well. Who likes that? Anyone? That's great. Filling in travel expense reports. Well, there are many problems with that. So one problem is sometimes I feel, well, we trust people to be responsible for like €1 million project, but we don't trust people to book a decent hotel. And so we have a lot of procedures around that where we say, okay, you're allowed to do this and go into that kind of hotel, travel, whatever, first, second, whatever class, and go from here to there or not. So it's also kind of, I would say, not trusting people. And here's another example. So a company I know of, that's actually also from that company, and they are called IT Agile, and that is meant to be an ICE, a German high-speed train. And they came up with just 3 rules for everything about travel expenses. So not like this big catalog, you're allowed to do this if you are there or in that position and blah, blah, blah. But they came up with 3 rules. The one rule is kind of a very easy one. Well, it has to be legal, whatever you do. Then the second is, well, it has to be sensitive how you spend the money, and nobody defines what it means. So it's up to everyone. And the third rule says here, take care of yourself. And that's also not defined what it means. I would know what it means for me, traveling a lot, like having some extra connections. I think that's not taking good care of myself. The interesting thing is that when I talked to the CEO of IT Agile a few months ago, he told me that they found out when they looked at what's happening with all the travel expenses, that about 1/3 is always traveling first class. And they are, I think, only operating in Germany, at least that I know. So there isn't much flying around anyway. So it's train, that's why they use the train here. So 1/3 is traveling first class, 2/3 is traveling second class, and he said right away, and you know what, it's not like CEOs, CXOs traveling first class, it's the consultants. And then they also said, well, everyone is fine with that because they travel the most, and therefore taking care of themselves, it is traveling first class. And so everyone was fine with that. And actually there's another company who has just one rule saying, whatever you spend your money on, and it doesn't really matter if it's travel or anything else, you only have to put it on the intranet. Where do you spend it on and how much? So it's more or less pure control. If I spend whatever money for, I don't know, coming here and go not into this hotel, I'm not sure if there's even a better hotel here, but probably not, right? But a really, whatever, high end, then people would ask me, so Jutta, was this necessary? Why did you go there and not, like, couldn't anything else do it? And probably I wouldn't do it next time, or maybe I have a good reason why. And then it's fine too. So they only have this one reason, thing. Okay. Okay, are we now having the problems? Let me see. Okay. This way of working out these examples actually imply a different view on the org chart or organigram. The typical view is this one. So we have the shareholders, the board of directors, and then a CEO who kind of supervises what's going on. It's very simplified, I know. However, it tries to look at shareholders only. And this is just a very limited view. So what's really needed, and what I see these companies are doing, is really they have a more holistic view what's all around there. So there is on the one hand, well, we have the value center in the middle. So these are the people creating the value, creating the product. And that can be whatever structure. Again, it can be a hierarchy in here, right? Then there is the board with the CEO, which is exactly the view we saw before. However, there's also, with the same balance, the customer. So we are also listening and are driven by what the market wants and needs. And then we also have, so for a while I thought, well, it should be almost only customer. However, then we came up with what we see here, which is what we call art and spirit at the top. And actually, it's kind of a counterbalance as well to the customer, because there might be customers or markets that don't fit maybe our ethical values, maybe it doesn't fit our strategy, our vision, our wherever we want to go. So this has the same influence, and what kind of value are we creating? And then we have the support service teams, which is more like according all the regulations and what do we need to adhere to, so more governmental structure. And what we see is that these companies, they really put into balance all of these four, and it's not like one thing is really driving it. What we are creating, it's all of them are helping us to do so. Then we have, then we have a different approach that we are seeing that these companies are following. And the approach they are following is actually what we call probing. Probing is a way of keeping experimenting. They look at what situation they're in, then they sometimes look at what has been tried, maybe in the industry, what have we heard of, and maybe we can try that as well, so come up with like what we heard somewhere else. Then we try an experiment and we look again at, does it help us to move forward? Maybe introducing consent decisions. And what's really important, and we don't see this enough yet, is then also publish to your peers. Well, I know from IT Agile they kind of did that inside the company, saying what these 3 rules, how they changed the attitude, behavior, also frustration level with travel expenses and the reporting of it. So publishing about that helps also to learn about that and being clearer what this can be. And now the example of the expense report actually is, it's good that I came up with that and I didn't know, is what's a probe that we kind of put together that's called Is Trust Cheaper? Because the thing is, what we believe is happening with something like these regulations is the mistrust. And so maybe if we trust people, that is cheaper. And so the whole thing here is what we call a probe. So it has a name, it's just cheaper. It has some background definition, so what we see is happening. Then we come up with a hypothesis here, and we come up with like one or several experiments that might validate or invalidate our hypothesis. And here I only have I didn't bring in here the experiment because I've described like 2 experiments before. Like the one was putting everything on the intranet, and the other thing would be the 3 rules, and you can try with those, and maybe you come up with something else. What I think is important to measure before and after, so you know, first of all, is your background definition really correct? And does it change really anything with your experiment given on your hypothesis? So is your hypothesis true, or maybe it's completely stupid? And so we see that companies are really using an approach like that. So it's probably a different way to define it would be keep experimenting, really. So ongoing experiments. However, we kind of thought experiments, it's too simple, and therefore we call it probe, because an experiment doesn't necessarily have a hypothesis or a background definition or something like that, and we think you need to really reflect on that before you jump into something. And so this is kind of an approach we see companies are doing. And there are a few of those probes that we have seen. Like one is, well, failures as opportunities is how I call it here, which is, well, I really dislike what also people in the Agile world talk about a lot. They often say like, oh, we have to really fail fast. Fail fast. Heard that, right? I think failing fast, that can't be a goal. It's learning fast, right? And whatever way you're using in order to get there, that would be the thing. So learn fast is your goal. And of course, it's okay to have failures also helping you to learn. However, anyway, so what I also see is that often companies, also my clients, say like, oh, yeah, well, we need to have like a culture where failures are okay and everyone can speak openly about them, and we speak about what we've learned and so on. And that's all fine. However, I hardly seen in these companies that this is really role modeled from the top. And that's where this probe comes in. So only if you start also at the top and saying like, look, last 2 weeks, this and that happened, and it was really bad, and this is what I learned from it, then everyone is more likely to also use the failures in that way to really learn, and not starting to hide them all the time and cover up and all of that, which is, again, probably not so much in a startup, at least I don't see this there, but in companies like yours, I see this a lot. That, well, people claim, so it's more a lip service, but nothing really happens, and the reason is no role models here. Another thing, which is a real world example, not the picture is a real world example, it's actually from a bank. So a bank I know of, they're the board of directors, and this is Jutta's imagination how the room of board of directors in a bank should look like. I don't know, probably it looked completely different in that bank. And they started this probe saying, oh, we want to see how our communication collaboration is changing by removing that table. And so in their room where they meet for their board of directors meeting, they don't have a table anymore. And what they reported to me was, so it's not a client of mine actually, what they reported to me was it has changed really for a way better the way how they talk to each other. They are more honest, more open, also more vulnerable, so more likely to speak also about difficult things. And what they also said, what was a surprise to them, that it also kind of went out to outside that room. Also the way they talked about what's happening in the board of directors meeting to their employees and their like the next step and so on. So the whole communication was way more open. Now, I'm not sharing this with you because I think all of you are sitting at such a table, and maybe you now think, well, this is all, I can't do that because I'm not part of the board of directors or anything. I'm sharing this with you because the experiment they really did is so simple. It didn't really cost anything, right? Just removing that table. It's not like a big thing. And it's also, well, if it's not working, we just put the table back in. So this is why I wanted to share it with you, is that very often these probes you're running with one or several experiments, it can be very, very easy and simple and cheap and everything, and still they can make a huge, huge difference. And also on all areas in the company, not only like at the top. And so is this now what I always feared? I guess. I think I stopped this here. I know, again, I said so already, that PowerPoint is really kind of weird today. I'm glad that it worked out so well so far. So the real thing that people are doing, what we see, is they come up with probes. So they design their own probes. So they reflect on where are we in, and well, some of them they compare, well, now I heard this bank has removed the table, maybe we want to remove the table as well. But that bank itself, they haven't heard about that from somebody else. So it's companies are starting just trying things out and looking at, well, we assume this is our hypothesis and therefore maybe this and that will happen, and it does or does not. So it, of course, means that you need some courage to do so. Yet, again, some of those experiments are really, really small, and so they are easy to do. And so that's kind of my invitation to start coming up with these probes, reflecting on what is it that's really painful at the moment, what's your hypothesis around that, and then just start trying. And at best, also in a defined environment, like maybe you try it for the next month or few weeks or days, whatever it is. And if it's working, sometimes it is people start speaking about that and talking about that, and it's kind of a natural thing that it's rolled out. And sometimes it is that you need proactively suggest it so that it's rolled out and goes its way, and really creating that wave. And I think you said I should stop like 50, and so it would be 50, which means we have time for questions here. No questions. Oliver.
When gradually changing an organization from within,
Yeah.
What are the most difficult barriers
Huh.
that you have to overcome?
That's hard. I guess the first thing is for making it happen is creating the awareness. So it's a bit how I started. So what are the challenges that we are facing as a company? And if we as a company, whoever that is, it's people, right? We don't see those challenges. We don't think we have those. If we think we are doing fine, and maybe we are doing fine, well, if we are doing fine, then probably it's fine, right? But if we only think we are doing fine and we ignore those challenges, then it's really, really hard. So the very first thing is to raise the awareness. that we face these things. And then looking at what's our biggest pain point and then coming up with like the first courageous step. And it can be really all kinds of things. Also, well, again, I'm from the Agile field, so one of my favorites is starting using retrospectives almost everywhere. It has nothing to do with Scrum, in my opinion. So again, if we speak very high up, a board of directors can run a retrospective, very great, but also any other group can, right? And it is keep learning. So, and that's something I believe is not a huge probe experiment or anything, right? But it can be really, really helpful. So I think the biggest challenge is to ensure that people have that awareness that something needs to change. And that's, again, that's kind of what I see often in these companies, that people talk about it, probably because they read about it in the newspaper or see it on TV or anywhere, yeah. But often I have the impression they lack the buy into that this is real. And then it might be too late at a point. So that's really the challenge, that the awareness is there. And I'm not sure if I have a really good idea how to create it other than, I don't know, pointing it out and maybe pointing out to competitors and looking at the economy and so on. Yeah. Yes?
If you see these four kind of different areas,
Mm-hmm.
like, is there an order?
Well, I see an order, well, kind of at least, but this is me because, and so that's the one data point, that's where I start, right? And it's also me because I'm in the Agile field. So I see that people start with like starting Agile in some of their teams, in whatever way. So most often it's in IT, yet sometimes nowadays it might be also somewhere else. But the typical thing is somewhere in IT. And then with like digitalization, realizing that IT is the asset and not as it was like, well, something on the side and we don't want to really know or something, it moves in or fusions, merges with other stuff. And so then the question is, okay, and what does it mean for other areas, other fields? I guess I see the most often then the next thing, well, often those Agile teams are also starting with open space early on. Often they use open space internally as like a way of having a meeting or kicking off a new project or so on. Yet then they often also lead into these self-selecting teams. So that's I think is a start really, which is good into that more passion, leveraging the passion. Then the next big thing that I see is actually the questioning about the budgeting, because it has such an impact on how are we operating on the market. And the last that I see is more looking at power structures. Yet again, it's one data point, and I believe my co-author probably would always say, well, I see them starting with Sociocracy, because that's the field he's coming from. And therefore, the companies who want to do that, first of all, they look for him, right? So, yeah. And so far, we don't know a lot of companies doing like all of these things. We know a lot who are doing like 3 of these things and having a peek into the 4th. And we know, and again, that doesn't mean anything if we don't know, because the world is big, right? We know maybe of, I would say, like 5 companies really doing everything. However, speaking of startups, often you have these things in place kind of automatically. You might not call them that way, yet the difficulty is then what do you do when you grow up, which is what we see in the discussions around Spotify at the moment, right? So they struggle a lot with that. So how can they keep this? Which means then you need to look into what's out there and what can be used even if you are big. Okay. So thank you very much.